just do a bit of a summary of what we've covered so far. Um, we're just gonna go back. I know it's been a while since we started the book of Revelation, but if we can cast our mind back, what is the first thing, um, the series of things that the book of Revelation starts looking at in those first three chapters?
The seven churches.
The seven churches. Yep. We'll share this one here. Yep, perfect. All right, so we got in Revelation, I'll say chapter 1, it sort of introduces us to the seven churches. Right, we see a picture of Jesus standing there among the candlesticks, holding the seven stars in his hand, and then John's told to write this message to the seven churches. Then, following from that, Revelation 2 to 3, we actually have the message to the seven churches. What follows after that? What do we get following on from Revelation 2 and 3 with the seven churches? Galen.
Chapter 4 and 5, we have a worship scene. Chapter 4 is with regards to the Father, and chapter 5 is regards to the Lamb that was slain, to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a worship scene.
Yep. So in Revelation 4 or 5, we've got a heavenly worship scene. Now, there's something I want to bring out. Can somebody read for us in Revelation chapter 3 and the message to the church of Philadelphia? Can someone read Revelation chapter 3, verse 7?
And to the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, these things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that has the key of David, he that openeth and no man shuts, and shuts and no man opens.
Can you actually read verse 8 as well?
I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name.
Excellent, excellent. So, in this message to the Church of Philadelphia, two questions just in summary. Well, firstly, we've got the open door there, and if you cast your minds back, what is this describing? Where is Philadelphia in the seven churches, and what is this open door that they had before them? Galen.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to put my hand down. The open door. Hang on. Philadelphia comes in the Great Awakening, sort of early 19th century. The open door wasn't that to do with like communication, or was it something to do with the fact that Christ then moved from the holy place to the most holy, because he's the one that's opening and shutting doors.
Yep.
So the fact that Christ has opened the door to the most holy, no man can shut that. because he that openeth, no man shutteth and shutteth. So I don't, because he talks about an open door. So I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. But it doesn't say that anything else was closed. Because in verse 7, it says, he that opens, no man can shut, and he that shuts, no man can open. It's not saying that he opened something and he closed something. It's just saying that he can open and shut as he pleases, as it will, and no man can do anything about it. But then it goes on in verse 8 to say that there's an open door and no man can shut it. So he doesn't say anything about shutting the door that no man can open. It's just the fact that he is the one that is able to shut and close at will, or open and shut at will.
Yep.
Sounds like
Yeah, go Pat.
good news. The door's not shut. Meant those that, because the door, which is probably the door in the heavenly sanctuary, and as Christ has moved, his people had to move with him. And I understand that the remainder of the Protestant churches are still in the holy place, but Satan has moved in there to keep them distracted, and they haven't moved through the door.
Yeah, that's something interesting there. You know, it's the idea that Christ has put an open door before his people. He hasn't dragged us through that door, or he's not pushing us through that door. He's placing that open door there for us to have that access, but he's asking us to follow him through that door. Margaret.
I've got written here, the door of the way into the Holy of Holies was open in heaven. Christ entered into the second phase of his ministry. Light shines from the open door of the heavenly sanctuary, and no man can stop that light. And over the page, he holds the key to the second apartment of the heavenly sanctuary. He holds the key to the close of probation. And he holds the key to paradise.
Absolutely. So the Philadelphia church, the sixth church in this series of 7 churches, has this message that there's this open door placed before them. And then right when we move into the next scene in this visions of Revelation, can someone read to me Revelation 4 and verse 1? And what is the first thing that John sees that starts this next scene in the book of Revelation?
After this, I looked, and behold, a door was open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was, as it were, a trumpet talking with me, which said, "Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter."
So what was the first thing that John saw?
Oh, he heard a trumpet, a
Mhm.
door opened, a door opened,
Mhm.
and then a trumpet.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting there. The 6th of these 7 churches has this message that there is this open door placed before them. And then chapters 4 and 5 start off with this open door that is before John, and he goes on to describe what he's seeing. So, and we're going to see a similar pattern like this arising, where the 6th church is presented with an open door. Okay, and that open door also introduces the next scene in Revelations 4 and 5. And so the seven churches go through all seven, but the sixth one, there is something in there that is used to introduce the next part of this book as it flows on. Margaret. You got your...
My apologies, I've never taken it down. Apologies.
Okay. No worries. No
What
worries.
size font are you using?
I'm using a font that fits good on my screen.
I see.
Very small. Ah, that's better.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Excellent. Maybe I'll bullet point that as well. Okay, so we get this heavenly worship scene. Then, what follows on from Revelation 4 and 5? What's the next thing that happens in the following chapters in chapter 6? What do we see there? Galen.
The scroll that Christ took in chapter 5, because he is worthy to do so, to open it, then they start being opened, the seals start being opened. So we've got sixth seal. I think we've got 6 seals. Oh, I see. There are 6 seals open, and then there's an interlude. There's a pattern. And then we've got chapter 8. I'm getting ahead of you. I'm sorry. I've just spotted what you're doing and what's
in the right
on.
direction, though. So, sorry, does someone else have a comment there as well? No, that's fine. So the couple of points you made there, Galen, is in chapter 5, okay, Christ receives this scroll that's sealed. Okay, so we have Christ receives the sealed book. Okay, and so that introduces the next section. So it's linked onto from the 7 seals, and it expands on that, the 6th church, and then introduces the next section. And so we have there the 7 seals starting in Revelation 6. Galen.
I don't have my hand up.
No?
What?
Oh, sorry. Gannon.
Sorry.
So the message just popped up on my screen, and I just, Gannon.
Yep. So I'll just share a quote. Maybe it will fit. Let's see. It's a very big quote here, but I'll just skip down to the last sentence. It says, in symbolic language was contained in that role the influence of every nation, tongue, and people from the beginning of Earth's history to its close. So we see in Revelation 4 to 5, there is that throne scene, and we know that as the investigative judgment starting from 1844, right? Thrones were cast down, same as Daniel chapter 7. And then in Revelation chapter 6, you have the unopening of the seals, right? Or unopening of what's inside the book. And Ellen White describes what's actually inside of that book, like based on this quote here, as well as with the first sentence of the second paragraph that I put. There in his open hand laid a book, the roll of the history of God's providences, the prophetic history of nations and the church. So there's a lot more in these quotes here, but it's just something to think about. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So following on from Revelation chapter 6, what do we have in Revelation chapter 7? Galen.
We have an interlude. It answers the question at the end of chapter 6, and who shall be able to stand?
Mm-hmm. So that Revelation 7 is the 144,000 and the great multitude. Following up on that. And it answers the question of the sixth seal. So again, the question is asked in that sixth seal, and this interlude, it explains that and gives more detail to it. And then what does chapter 8 start off with? What do we have in Revelation 8 verse 1? The seventh seal, yep. I see that in the, sorry, I just noticed the chat there. Yep. We've got that seventh seal. And following on from that, so it starts off looking at the 7 churches. Then we move to the 7 seals. Then what follows the 7 seals?
7 angels.
Mm-hmm. We see 7 angels there. And what are these 7 angels doing?
Sounding
Mm-hmm.
messages.
Mm-hmm. The 7 trumpets. Yeah, they blow 7 trumpets with 7, each with its own message, its own judgment that follows. So that takes us through chapters 8 to 9. We've got the trumpets, numbers again, 1 to 6. And so that's going through there, all the trumpets, 1 to 6 at the end of chapter 9. Then what do we see in chapter 10? Galen.
Chapter 10 is the isn't it a, hang on, it's a continuation. It's oh no, it's a isn't it the explanation in what's happening in the beginning of chapter 8? Or it gives us the time frame at the beginning of chapter 8. It's, or am I looking at the wrong one? No, it's the last, it's not the last seal. Oh, it's the first woe. Second woe. No, first.
No,
First woe.
chapter 9. Chapter 9 deals with the first and the second woe. That's the 5th and the 6th trumpet. And then chapter 10, we see this, you know, a mighty angel standing up with that little book opened in his hand, declaring there shall be time no longer.
That's right, because the second woe, the 6th trumpet, doesn't finish until partway through 11.
Mm-hmm. and they've got that bittersweet experience. in
The
there.
great disappointment.
This is dealing with part of the experience. Whoops. Here we go. The experience of God's people living in that transition point, I'll say at the end of the sixth trumpet. Right, so again, it deals with God's people living at the end of that sixth trumpet. And the reason I say that is because we have the sixth trumpet there sounds in verse 13 of chapter 9. The sixth angel sounded. But then in chapter 11:14, after we see the beast from the bottomless pit, then we have the completion. The second woe is past. So it's that sixth trumpet, the second woe, is interrupted with this interlude in chapter 10 that gives us the experience of God's people, and it also introduces us, gives us a little introduce in this thing to the final, in the days when the seventh angel shall sound, the mystery of God will be finished. And that happens in Revelation 11. You've got the end of the sixth and the seventh trumpet. And that brings us to what we finished looking at. Now, so the book of Revelation here in this first half, we see this sort of repeated pattern occurring throughout. What are the ideas and the themes that we see repeating there? Galen.
We're given explanations of six whatevers, and then there's usually an interluding scene, and then we get the seventh of whatever. But the interlude tends to answer a question, or it explains something, or it goes into more detail about something that's been asked or has happened before, or important things like that. But then it usually goes on to the seventh, and I don't know if it's just me, but no, that doesn't work with those. No, forget it. That pattern doesn't match, but the one I was thinking of. But yeah, that's what I see.
Now, with these, got 7 churches, the 7 seals, and the 7 trumpets. What is the time frames covered by each of these?
You'll have to tell us, Matthew, I think.
Yeah, someone just sent it there in the message to me. Yeah, it's the 2,000 years, like since from the early church right through to the second coming. They don't always match up with each other. Like, for example, the second church doesn't cover the exact same time period as the second trumpet, but they both span what's referred to as sort of the Christian era. We have an illusion that the seventh in all of them sort of leads right up to the second coming. And what is the context of each of these. Like the seven churches is the clearest one. Well, what is that telling us? What are the seven churches about? What is that message about?
Hmm. Uh,
It's talking about the state of his representatives. He's given them admonition, and he's also given them encouragement.
Mm. Yeah, it's the condition of the church throughout the Christian age. As we looked at the first church, Ephesus, deals with that early Christian movement, sort of the zeal and the purity that it went out with. And then the church begins to be suffering persecution under Smyrna, compromise under Pergamos, corruption and apostasy under Thyatira. Then under Sardis, there's this sort of reformation that's trying to get away from the apostasy of Thyatira, but it's only a halfway. They end up establishing their own tradition. They have this name that they live, but they're actually dead. And then Philadelphia, you got this reestablishment of this pure church that has this zeal for God. And then Laodicea, this lukewarm dead church right at the end. And this sort of covers the condition of the church and what its experience is throughout the entire Christian age. And so that's what the seven churches cover. Now the seven seals cover this similar time period, dealing from the early church right up until the second coming of Christ, but it looks at the same time period from a different point of view. Can anyone remember what were the things covered under the seven seals, and what is the sort of the point of view? What are the things that the seven seals are revealing to us about this time period? Gannon sort of mentioned it a bit in the quote that he posted there. Galen.
I don't know if I have the right words, but it's almost like not quite the state of the church, but like the state of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And how people react to it. I don't know if that's right or.
Mm-hmm.
I've got no other way of explaining it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good because we can see this message of the horsemen going out. The first one is white going out in victory. Then again the red has got persecution, and the black and then the pale or the grizzle, there starts to be famine and suffering, and persecution is growing, and corruption is growing. And then finally under the fifth one, the martyrs are crying out for God to judge those that dwell on the earth that are persecuting and killing them. And then God responds in that seventh one with the signs on earth and in the heavens, giving God's people that encouragement and that guidance that the end is near. And so we have, again, that the things that the church will experience and will suffer through. So the seven churches are more a direct counsel to the church in what they need to hear. The seven seals deal a lot more with, it's still looking at the history of the church, but a lot of the things that they would suffer, the things that the gospel would suffer, and then what it would have to endure. The seven trumpets, the most recent one we looked at, what did the trumpets contain? Judgments. Yep, thank you, Galen. The trumpets were judgments. We saw that they were the judgments on those who had persecuted God's people, the answer to the saints under the fifth seal crying out. That they were the judgments on those that had persecuted God's people, spanning that time period. And so we've got this pattern of the seven churches, the seven seals, and the seven trumpets. The counsel to God's people, what they would suffer and have to endure, and the judgments that God would send upon those who were persecuting them. And there's this idea that as it goes through this pattern of there's six, and then there's this interlude that sort of comments on that sixth one, and then we are introduced to another cycle of seven, where there's something that comments and answers the question of the sixth one, then we're introduced to the new cycle of seven. And in the middle of that sixth one, we're given this interlude with the experience of God's people, and that brings us to the end of Revelation chapter 11. Now, can somebody read out for me Revelation 11 and verse 18?
And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth.
Now this verse here in Revelation 11:18 actually introduces us to the structure of the entire rest of the book. As we're going to go and see, the next thing we are introduced to in chapters 12 is the wrath of the nations, or the anger of the nations against God's people. Then it moves on to the wrath of God with the seven last plagues, and then the judgment, or the reward of the saints and the punishment of the wicked at the end of the book of Revelation. And so just to get a feel for the structure, again, what are we introduced to in chapter 12? Who appears to us in chapter 12?
The woman clothed with the sun,
Mm-hmm.
the church.
Yep. So we have the church there. And what happens in verse 3?
The dragon, Satan.
Mm-hmm. What's he doing?
He wanted to devour her child as soon as it was born.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And can
So
someone?
I was just going to say, he's lying in wait. It's like an ambush.
Yep. He's been plotting this ever since his rebellion failed in heaven and he got kicked out.
Yes.
He's been waiting for Christ to come, but it didn't work. His plans did not work. And so can someone read out verse 17, Revelation 12, verse 17?
And the dragon was angry at the woman and declared war against the rest of her children, all who keep God's commandments and maintain their testimony for Jesus.
Hmm.
And I have faith of the Son of God. Is that the spirit of prophecy, isn't it? Testimony.
Yes.
So we're told that the dragon was wroth with the woman. And what happens in Revelation 13? What's the big thing that happens in Revelation 13? What does that lead us up to?
Worship.
Mm-hmm. Galen.
We've got the sea beast, the land beast, and the image of the first beast.
Mm-hmm. And what do these beasts do?
They're not very nice.
It's a little bit of an understatement. Yep.
The understatement of the century. But
They empower the people. They have great authority. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
They blaspheme and persecute.
as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. I think pretty much sums it up. It's about worship.
So even though Revelation, it talks about, how the first beast got its deadly wound and was healed, and it was there for 42 months, and there's this historical background to the beast. The whole chapter, or all that historical background, is leading up to this enforcement of the mark of the beast, of the image of this final persecution. Everything else in that chapter is just to give us context, so we know who Scripture is talking about when it tells us about this final persecution that God's people would have to endure. And so Revelation 12 introduces us to Satan and his hatred of the church, his war against Christ, and his wrath that is kindled against the remnant of God's people. This sort of great controversy imagery, and it finishes with saying that his wrath is aimed at the woman and her seed. And then in Revelation 13, it actually covers for us what that wrath is. What is that? The devil's final wrath against the remnant of his seed to keep the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus. Then what do we see at the beginning of Revelation 14?
The Lamb and the 144,000.
These are God's final people.
They're sealed.
Mm-hmm.
Having as Margaret said, the Lamb with 144,000, but they have his father's name written in their foreheads.
Absolutely. And after we're presented with a picture of God's final people, what is the next thing that Revelation 14 moves on to?
Verse 9 is the doom of the worshippers of the beast. The third angel covered them with a loud voice and tells them, if they have the mark of the beast,
Mm-hmm.
their forehead or they're done for.
Yep. So it moves on to the final message. It presents us with God's final people, and then that final message. And as you mentioned, it's a message that deals with, the mark of the beast, all these things that Satan is bringing on the world to try to destroy God's people, and really destroy faithfulness to God. Because that's really what Satan wants to destroy. He wants to destroy faithfulness to God.
Amen.
And if he can't destroy that, he's trying to destroy the people who are faithful to God.
Mm.
And how does chapter 14 finish off? What's the last thing we see in chapter 14?
The final destruction of the wicked.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we've got the second coming, the final destruction of the wicked and reward of God's people, if you will, that the harvest of the earth that happens.
Where is it where I've read that the Lord says, don't look to the left or the right or behind you at that time, because it will devastate you?
Are you thinking of that 1,000 shall fall at, right hand and 10,000 left, but it shall not come nigh thee? Only with the eyes shall they behold the destruction of the wicked.
That's probably part of it, but there's a verse that says, don't look to the left or to the right or behind you. Keep your eyes on Christ. In other words, on the commander in chief and the person that God has given the rights to take the wicked out. But definitely says, do not look to the left or the right or behind you.
I can't think of that one in particular, but there are other similar ones that do come to mind. The one that stands out to me is in Luke 21, when Jesus talks about all the signs and the destruction that's coming upon the earth. He talks about men's hearts failing them for fear, looking upon those things that come upon the earth. But then to his disciples says, but when you see these things, look up. And so he describes the earth as two groups. The lost that are looking upon the destruction that's coming upon the earth, and his people that are looking up to him in the midst of all this destruction. Their eyes are not getting distracted from Christ.
Amen. Amen.
And so we can see there, and it presents, Satan in the great controversy in chapter 12, chapter 13, the outflow of his wrath and the anger of these nations and these powers to try to destroy faithfulness to God and God's people. And then in chapter 14, we see God's response to that as he, despite Satan's attempts to destroy all faithfulness, he has a people that will be faithful, that follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And so from Revelation 12 to 14, it deals with the anger of the nations. Then what do we have in Revelation 15 and 16?
The last plagues.
Mm-hmm.
The 7 angels were holding the 7 last plagues, which would bring God's wrath to completion.
Mm. Absolutely. The 7 last plagues, and as you mentioned there, it's in your version it says will bring God's wrath to completion. Or it says, in them is filled up the wrath of God. Now in Revelation, when we read 11 verse 18, it talked about the nations were angry, and we see that Satan stirring up the nations with anger against God's people in chapters 12 to 14. And the next thing Revelation 11:18 told us, and thy wrath has come, and God's wrath has come. And that's what we see in response in Revelation 15 and 16. We have the 7 last plagues being poured out. Now, can somebody read for me Revelation 16 and verse 19?
And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath.
So part of those 7 last plagues, the final one is that Babylon gets its final judgment before God. And can somebody read for me Revelation 17 verse 5? And I got the question is what is chapter 17 telling us about? Who is that describing to us? Can someone read chapter 17 verse 5?
And upon her head was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abomination of the earth. That's the papacy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so it carries on identifying to us who Babylon is. And it carries on to describe it, seated on 7 mountains which the woman sits, drunk with the blood of the saints, all these other descriptions, and how it's, arrayed in purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones. There's all these descriptions upon it. So the 7th plague there at the end of chapter 16 talks about the judgment of Babylon. Revelation 17 starts off by identifying Babylon, describing to us who it's talking about when it comes to Babylon. And then what happens at the end of chapter 17?
The victory of the Lamb.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And what else is described there, Galen?
The words of God shall be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
But she gets her in verse 16, she gets her comeuppance.
Yep. Yeah, and that's how the words of God are fulfilled. Babylon is destroyed. It describes it very graphically there. These 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God hath put it in his heart to fulfill his will. Exactly what we were told in Revelation 16 with those plagues. Babylon comes up before God for judgment. And then chapter 17 is explaining Babylon, identifying who Babylon is and the judgment it receives and its destruction. And then in chapter 18, what is covered in there? We've got two things really. At the beginning of chapter 18, verses 1 to 4, we've got a message going out. And what do we see there?
That the message is for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And what is that message?
Come out of her, my people. Oh, sorry, Galen's got an hand up. Sorry.
That's fine. Galen, you got something to add?
It's not a problem, Margaret. To me, it's explaining why she's receiving the judgment she is. Like what she's like. It's like chapter 17 is identifying who she is and the things that some of the things that she does, but 18 is more the why
Mm-hmm.
to me.
Mm-hmm. There's this call to come out of Babylon because Babylon is fallen, and it adds details to describe what it means when it says it's fallen. And so in the first part of Revelation chapter 18, there's this message of calling people to come out of Babylon because it's fallen. But can somebody read for me Revelation 18, verse 9 and 10? Because there's another group calling out because of Babylon. And who are they and what are they saying?
I can read that. The kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived delicately with her shall bewail her, or deliciously with her, and shall bewail her, lament her, and they shall see the smoke of her torment, standing afar off for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. So that's the destruction of Babylon.
Babylon's being destroyed, but when Babylon's being destroyed, what is their attitude? What is their response when they see the destruction of Babylon?
They lament for Babylon. They're not sorry for their sins or anything she's done. They just lament because there goes their livelihoods and their riches.
So again, in Revelation 18, it pictures the wrath of God against Babylon, the destruction of Babylon. But there's two groups. There's a group being called out of Babylon that recognizes it for the corruption it is. But then you've got these other groups that are wailing and are sad and are absolutely distraught that Babylon has fallen. Galen.
Would that parallel with Cain and Abel? I know it's probably a bit of a leap, but where Cain was sorry for the punishment, but not what he did. So would that be a similar parallel?
Yeah, in a sense, like they're sorry that Babylon's been destroyed. Because that they really just enjoyed the things that it wanted. But I would say it's not even as much as Cain. At least Cain was sorry for the consequences of his actions, of the consequences he received for his actions. These people, they're not even acknowledging that anything that Babylon was doing was wrong, or that anything's
I have a question
bad about it. Norm.
Yeah, sorry, but before I lose it, I have a question about when the Lord said, there's many that will persecute and kill you who thought they were doing my will. Are these those people?
No.
Um,
Because there's many now that are already worshiping Satan, and they don't even know it.
yeah, I wouldn't say though, because the people it's described here talks about the kings of the earth, that have committed, fornications and lived deliciously. It talks about the merchants that have become rich off of it. Um, the shipmasters later on. These descriptions are not of people that were, you'd say, innocently led astray by Babylon. These were people that were right on board, and supporting Babylon and were making a profit of Babylon, and they, these people weren't deceived. They loved Babylon. They were fully in there. They were making billions of dollars off government mandating, whatever they were mandating, whatever Babylon's regulations were that they were forcing upon the people. These kings of the earth and the merchants were making billions of dollars off it. So when the Babylonian system fell, they were mourning there. Merlene.
I'm wondering whether it's not the comparison between the state versus the church. The state who gives the power to the church, them being the merchants and so forth, the ones that have actually empowered the joining of church and state.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could extend to that. There are lots of different people that have made money and have gained power from this system. And I think it sort of encompasses all of those groups, as part of it. Everyone that's had a part to play in that built up Babylon, that made their living off what it had established. And they're mourning its destruction. But as we move into chapter 19, what is the first thing we read in chapter 19? Can someone read 19 verses 1 and 2?
And after these things, I heard a great voice of much people in heaven saying, Alleluia, salvation and glory and honor and power unto the Lord our God. For true and righteous are his judgments. For he hath judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and hath avenged the blood of his servants at her hand.
So what do we have there? What's happening here at the opening of chapter 19? Galen.
I see it as there's obviously rejoicing in heaven because the saved are there, but I also see an answer to the question of the saints whose blood was crying out from under the altar. There's an answer there that they have been avenged finally.
And what do we see at the end of chapter 19? Who is the figure that we see coming upon the scene in Revelation 19, I think verse 11?
Yes. It's Christ, isn't it? Coming.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
The rider on the white horse. And what's he coming to do?
Execute judgment.
Execute judgment, yep. He comes back, it says that with that sword that goes out of his mouth, that he should smite the nations and shall rule them with a rod of iron. You've got the second coming, the destruction of the wicked. And that is sort of the, that final of the seven last plagues is the second coming of Christ, where the wicked are destroyed. And that is the finishing up the wrath of God that is to come. Then the next section in Revelation 20, what do we see happening in Revelation 20? What starts in Revelation chapter 20?
Beast was captured. False prophet who did mighty miracles on behalf of the beast. Miracles that deceived all who accepted the mark of the beast and who worshipped his statue. Beast and the false prophet who thrown alive into the fire.
Revelation chapter 20? I think was that sorry, you were reading 19 verse 20.
Oh, okay.
Was that in Revelation chapter 20?
Mm-hmm.
What is the scene we see there at the beginning in the first 7 verses? What's that describing?
Satan chained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as Galen's put there in the chat, the 1,000 years, the millennium starting.
Yeah, the rest of the dead did not come back to life until the 1,000 years had ended.
Mm-hmm. So we have the millennium starting, that the saints are given their crowns and the thrones which they sit on. They're given their rewards. The dead are judged. The wicked dead are judged. Judgment's given to the saints, as we know from 1 Corinthians 6. He says, the saints shall judge the world, and this is the time where that happens. And then following on from that, at the end of the millennium, what do we see happening for the rest of chapter 20?
The final destruction of the wicked.
The second resurrection, the great white throne judgment, and the final destruction of the wicked. And finally, the last Revelation 21 and 22. What do we see in there?
New heaven and new earth.
Amen. Amen. The final reward of the righteous. And so I'll share this again. You can see that Word document again. Awesome. So we see at the beginning, it starts with the 7 churches, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets. There's this repetition where it repeats sort of the Christian age, leading from sort of that first century, the early Christian church, up to the second coming. It deals with details to do with the churches, goes back, covers the similar time frame from the point of view of the 7 seals. It deals with, what God's people would be suffering, what they would have to be lived through as they go and spread the gospel message. The 7 trumpets go back and deal with that same time frame and deal with, what judgment God will pass upon Babylon, upon those people that are persecuted God's church. And then the summary text we have in Revelation 11 verse 18 speaks about the time has come that the nations were angry. And we see Revelation 12 to 14 deals with that. Satan in the great controversy with his wrath and his war against the woman is carried out in chapter 13 and 14. There's the response to that. Then it says, the nations were angry and thy wrath has come. And we see that in the next section of Revelation. And the time of the dead that they should be judged. And in that section, we have both the rewards given to the saints and that God will destroy those that destroy the earth. And so in the end, we have the reward of the saints and the destruction of the wicked. And so we see that the first half of the book of Revelation is sort of a repeat. There's three cycles dealing with the Christian church and how it's grown throughout the ages. But the last half of Revelation actually focuses in on the end times. Okay, there is some history and some of the things that it refers to, the 42 months here, the Satan trying to destroy the man-child here. But those things appear there to give us context to understand what happens at the end, to understand that the anger of the nations, that wrath, that persecution of God's people. And so that's what I sort of wanted to look at today, is the book of Revelations. The structure of the book, I would say, presents the book in two halves. The first half deals with the history of the Christian church, repeated 3 times. The second half really focuses on the end times, on that final sort of the Satan's final persecution to try to destroy faith in God, God's response in judgment against those systems, and the reward of the wicked and the righteous. And so with that in view, next time we'll start looking at this first section, when the nations were angry, that the wrath of Satan against God's people, and is trying to destroy those who have faith in God.